Well, I want to welcome everyone who has taken the time to join us this evening. I am recording this session because we will have providers who weren't able to join us this evening. There is another session tomorrow evening, but I am recording this so that we can put it on our website. So anybody who missed tonight or tomorrow night's sessions can listen to it later. But thank you all for coming. I am going to ask that everyone remain muted during the presentation. And if you have questions, we're going to do those in the chat so that I can read the questions, because if you have a question, probably somebody else has that same question. So if you put them in the chat, I will read them out and then answer them. Hopefully I can answer your questions. And if I can't, I will certainly find somebody to answer them, and we will follow up with you after the session, probably sometime during the day tomorrow. So you can access the chat box by clicking on that message icon at the bottom of your screen. If you would please try to keep your questions centered around the contract and the contract process. If you have any specific situational or individual questions or anything about reimbursement or professional development, I'm going to ask you to contact your specialist in those departments to get those questions answered. Mostly because I don't know enough to help you, and I know just enough to give you probably bad information. So we'll just make sure that we get you started on the right foot by directing you to the right person. If you have individual questions about your contract or you're having difficulty with your contract, please direct those to your contract specialist. They're in the best position to help you with all of that. All right, tonight, basically, we're going to review the changes to the school readiness contract, the phrases and the pieces that are different from last year's contract. We're going to review rule and policy changes, which are the basis for the changes in the contract. And then I'm going to give you some reminders and tips so that you can be successful in completing your contract, because we want you to be able, we don't want to have to reject the contract and go bouncing back and forth. So there are several things that people consistently miss when they're doing their contracts. And so I'm going to kind of talk about those so you'll all have a heads up on those. Any changes to the contract, to the rules, to the policies, those have all been made by the State Department of Education's Division of Early Learning. And they make those changes in order to meet the new law and code requirements that are determined by the Florida State Legislature. And when those things happen and there are changes to the contract, sometimes those also affect your local ELC policies. So if we have any of those, I'll certainly go over those as well. Okay, so that's where we're heading tonight. All right, so we're going to talk about the contract changes. And you may have noticed, or if you haven't seen your contract yet, maybe not, but the SR contract is now identified as Form DEL SR20 instead of OEL SR20. That's because this last year, the Office of Early Learning became the Division of Early Learning in the Department of Education. So they're starting to change over their form numbers to capture that change. It's also dated July 22, which of course means that that's the contract for this year. Updates to the contract are reflected with the new date on the bottom of all of the pages. And you're going to see that throughout the contract and the other forms, such as the 20L, which is the one that talks about your insurance and that sort of thing. Now, there aren't a lot of changes this year. Most of them are wording changes, and a couple of things that are in here that really don't affect us a whole lot here in Pinellas County. This first one is one of those ones that doesn't affect us here in Pinellas County because we don't have a military base here in Pinellas County. But there was an additional provider type added to the contract this year that includes nationally accredited programs that are conducted by the Department of Defense on a military installation. So you're going to see a reference to that type of provider at the very beginning in the provider eligibility section, and then throughout the rest of the contract, wherever they're breaking out the types of providers that may be affected by something. So I really don't think this affects us here that much, but since it is a change in the contract, I wanted to make sure that I pointed it out in case anybody had any questions about it. But that's essentially who those people are. You're also going to see them listed in Exhibit 2 of the contract, because there's a U.S. Department of Defense certificate that they have to provide. So you'll see an additional item in the Exhibit 2 of the contract. The other program change that may affect some of you is in letter F under that eligibility, general eligibility section. And this has to do with your program assessment scores. You know, the class assessment that you all receive, and you get a composite score, and your composite score determines whether or not you get an additional quality performance incentive money reimbursement for each of your school readiness children. This year, assessed programs that have achieved a biennial status, any provider who scores a 5 or above doesn't have to be assessed every year. They get to be assessed every other year. However, there were a lot of providers that were saying that they would like to waive their biennial status and be assessed every year instead of every other year. Now, in some coalitions, the annual assessment opens providers up to apply for grants and other things. The other part of that rule is that choosing to be assessed every year instead of every other year, a lot of directors in centers choose to use that feedback as part of their staff evaluation process every year. And they also use that to help guide their choices for staff development for their staff in centers. So if you're a center director and your center has scored a composite score over a 5, those are some benefits to waiving your biennial status and choosing to get assessed every year. The other benefit is that you know when the coalition is coming out to do the assessment. It's going to be about the same time every year, because we have to conduct those assessments like 30 days prior to 30 days after your assessment from the previous year. If you choose to keep your biennial status, which you're perfectly able to do, that's your right to do that. But if you keep your biennial status and you lose more than 20% of your staff since the last assessment was conducted, the coalition is obligated to come out and do another assessment, because the experience of the children has changed with the loss of those staff. You know that not everybody teaches the same way and manages their classroom the same way. So when you have more than 20% of your staff change over, we have to come out within 30 days of that change. So at that point, you've just lost staff, you've replaced them with new staff, and then we have to come out and do an assessment in 30 days. That's a lot of anxiety and stress. And that's why a lot of providers are choosing to waive that biennial status and just go every year, because they know exactly when we're coming out. I don't want to influence you in any way, because if your staff are solid and you're not worried about that, or you're a home provider and you're all by yourself and you're on a biennial status, unless you're really, looking for that feedback, and a lot of providers do, they want to get that feedback so they can determine their own professional development growth. You can totally keep your biennial status, and we will be coming out every other year to do your program assessment. So that's the option that's available. It asks you, do you wish to waive your biennial status? And if you want to change from being assessed every other year to being assessed every year, you're going to say yes. If you're a provider who's scoring below a 5 on your composite score, that's not an option for you. We're coming out every year anyway, if your score is anywhere between a 4 and a 5. All right. And I think everyone knows that we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but the score to be able to contract this year is a 4. So if you have a score below a 4, if you scored below a 4 last year, you're probably on a QIP. QIPs, quality improvement plans, last for 1 year and then you're reassessed. Anyone who's reassessed and doesn't achieve a score of at least a 4, the requirement is the contract must be terminated. So I just want to put that out there. Providers do have the opportunity to purchase another assessment to see if they can improve that score. But beyond that, then if they aren't able to achieve at least a 4, then the contract must be terminated. That's in the rules. So I'm gonna put that out there. All right. One other change in section 3 under provider responsibilities and scope of work, developmental screenings. They have changed this. You all know that screenings must be conducted within the first 45 days after enrollment, but subsequent screenings will now be conducted annually at the child's redetermination instead of their birth date. So that's a change. Last year it was at their birth date. This coming year, it's going to be at redetermination time. Now, for most children, that's once a year, but we all know that we have children whose redeterminations can sometimes be more frequent than that. So keep that in mind. When you're looking at your children, be checking your portal for that information on who you have coming up for a screening. Okay, check the chat box. I don't see any questions yet. Nobody looks like they're snoring. So, okay, we'll move on. This is not the most wonderfully exciting material. So I get that. So I understand if some of you start to wander a little. I'll try to throw some jokes in there to make it not so bad. Provider responsibilities in that same section, item 33 under deliverables. It also changed the wording for the ages of the children that are to be screened. It used to say each child age birth to kindergarten entry. They've now said birth to 60 months. And again, they've put the redetermination as the time at which the children need to be screened. That's in that section as well. Okay. Now we're going to go on to the next section, which is the coalition's responsibilities. And this also deals with developmental and subsequent screenings. So we all know that our state database, the portal, has had some growing pains this year. And when they make enhancements and they add things, sometimes we have some hiccups in the system. And I know for a while this last year for developmental screening, there were some times when you didn't have access to some of that information. So what they've added to the contract is that in the event that the portal is not functioning properly, it will be the coalition's responsibility to notify providers of the children that need to be screened. So right now the portal is functioning properly. I think they've gotten most of the bugs worked out of the developmental screening information and how that process works. So right now it is expected that screenings are conducted on time, and that is within 45 days of enrollment or at their redetermination. Now remember, parents are sent emails daily to complete the ASQ3 and the ASQ-SE, social emotional ASQ. They get emails daily for the first 5 days. Now, if they don't waive that responsibility, and they can in that first 5 days, they can say, I'm not doing this, I want the provider to do it. They can waive that responsibility. But after the first 5 days, it is your responsibility as a provider to complete that those screenings before the 45th day after enrollment. So when you go into the portal and you look, you'll see if your kids still have a green mark next to them, they're still okay in that window. Once that color turns over to kind of a rosy red color, that's you need to get going because we're already past due. Okay. All right. Any questions about the screening? Y'all are soaking everything up. Good. Okay. Now, the interesting parts, compensation and funding. Now everybody's awake. Okay. Reimbursement rates established. Section 45, provider reimbursement rates. The phrase in the portion of this contract used to say that providers agreed to accept the provider rates for reimbursement if they were less than the coalition's pay rate. However, now all providers will be paid the coalition's reimbursement rate for each age group, regardless if their pay rates are lower. We have providers who service families in low-income areas, and their families can't afford to even pay the coalition's reimbursement rates. And so we've had providers who have had to set their private pay rates lower than the reimbursement rates the coalition pays. And in the past, you've been paid that lower amount. You're going to be paid the coalition rate regardless. If your rates are lower, you're still getting paid the coalition rate. Okay. And you won't have to charge your private pay families more than they can afford to be able to pay, to be paid at that reimbursement rate. All right. Some other good news about the Gold Seal rate. They changed the wording on this. Providers will now be paid for Gold Seal at 20% above the ELC approved rates for each care level and unit of care. It used to say up to 20%, which allowed coalitions to adjust to a rate lower than 20%, but now you get the whole 20%. So I wanted to put that there. Quality performance incentive rate. Now, we talked about the program assessment a little bit ago, and we talked about the 4 is required for the contract this year. So because the minimum threshold score to contract for school age has changed from 3.50 to 4, and that minimum rate was raised, and it's in the rule 6M 4.500. Yeah, you guys are excited about that. Providers meeting the lower half of that qualifying range. If you have a score between 4 to 4.49, the state has determined that those providers are no longer eligible to receive that incentive differential. This last year, you received 4% per child above standard. But in the lower half of the 4 range, there won't be any differential provided. But if you're between a 4.5 and a 4.99, you'll still receive the 4% that was given out this last year. And of course, providers who are between a 5 and a 5.99 will get the 7% differential. And those providers scoring a 6 and above will still continue to receive the 10% quality performance incentive differential per child. So, okay, so someone has asked, if a center closes and staff are transferred to another center, will they be reassessed in 30 days? The reassessment happens if you are a biennial provider, which means that you're scoring a 5 or higher, and you lose 20% of your staff. So if a center closes, obviously that center won't be assessed because they're now closed. A center getting new staff, I don't believe there's anything in the rule that mentions the addition of more staff or the changing of staff, but I'm going to have to see about that. So you're going to have to give me some time to check into that. Staff adding. Staff effect. Biennial. Reassessment. Okay, so we know that losing 20% will do that. I don't know if adding new staff will do that. So I will ask, I am going to get your name. And we will be in touch to let you know the answer to that. Okay, thank you for that question. You're welcome. All right, any other questions about the quality performance incentive rates and or program assessment? No? Okay, again, in compensation and funding. So rates and change limitations, this is the section that requires providers to report any changes to their child care rate or your Gold Seal status. Changes to rates are to be reported to the coalition in writing at least 14 days prior to the change. This is not new. This has always been in the contract. The coalition considers your submission of your profile with the changes that have been made as written notification. Our contract specialists typically check at least twice a week and sometimes more often for submitted profiles for the providers that are in their caseload. If you shot them an email, that would be great and they would love that. But we are considering the submission of the profile with the changes as a written, as the written communication. And then if it's for a change in rates, it will be applied 14 days after the submission of the profile. Now, unfortunately, we've had some people who have changed their rates and not said anything to us and not put anything in their profile. And they've gone ahead and they've started charging their parents a different rate, but they've not communicated it to us. Unfortunately, because of the contract, what we have to do at that point is because we have to amend your contract for a rate change. So when we amend your contract for the rate change, we have to put it 14 days in advance of the submission. Any charges that you made to families prior to that effective date, 14 days after we're notified, will need to be credited or reimbursed for any overcharges for a rate that was not communicated or publicized. So we need for you to make sure that you get those to us at least 14 days before you want to do it. Okay. Now, last year's contract, we were prohibited from paying an approved reimbursement rate that exceeded your provider's private pay rate. However, that phrase has been removed from the contract for 22-23, and Gold Seal providers are going to get the full 20% differential and collect the full amount, even if it exceeds their private pay rates. And if you're also getting quality performance incentive differentials, you'll also get those. So you have the potential, to earn 20, 30, 35% over standard, over the coalition rate. If you have Gold Seal, you're scoring over a 6 in your program assessment, and you're conducting the qualifying child assessments. And I don't mean ASQs when I say that. I mean the child assessments that's part of the program where you can earn 5%. You have a certificate that validates that you can do assessments using TS Gold, Core, or Galileo. This doesn't have anything to do with the ASQs. That's a confusing piece too. I'm going to address that in a little bit. But the word maximum in coalition maximum reimbursement rates has been removed from Exhibit 5, where all of the school readiness contract rates are, because you can earn more than the coalition max rate if you have those qualifying differentials. So now I'd like to review some things that seem to be points of confusion during the annual provider profile period. And we're getting some questions during contracting right now. And in general, just notification communications that happen throughout the contract year. So I just want to go over these because that is essentially all of the things that have changed in the contract for this year. That's it. Now, some of those are pretty impactful, but there were not a lot of other changes to the contract. We had some questions this year about the EVerify Affidavit. In the coalition website on the For Providers tab, there are a lot of resources for you to use. The EVerify Affidavit is something that was introduced a year or two ago, and that is in there and it's available for download. There's also a frequently asked questions piece that you can get for EVerify. This document is an annual document. You must do this every year. That's a requirement. And it's also a document that needs notarized. So please ensure that you secure a notary public prior to signing your affidavit. And we've had a couple of issues where family members who are notaries and direct family members, like spouses or brothers and sisters or, husband and wife, whatever, have notarized the document for their spouse or their brother or their sister or whomever. Any of you who may or may be notaries know that that's a no-no. A notary is not allowed to notarize a document for a direct family member. It invalidates the notarization. So please make sure that you're using a notary who is not directly related to you when you sign your EVerify affidavit, okay? And by signing that, you are basically swearing that you have registered in the EVerify system and you use that system to verify the legal working status of your newly hired employees or substitutes if you're a family home. So please make sure that you understand what you're signing when you sign that, because if something should ever come up and someone would accuse a center of, hiring someone and they did not run them through the EVerify system, that is a non-compliance with your contract. Any questions about the EVerify system and the EVerify document? Okay, I'm going to keep checking the chat box just in case anybody has any questions. Maybe you'll think of something when we get further down the line, and that's okay. Go ahead and ask it. Now, we made this change last year, but I'm not sure that we talked about it last year. So in an effort to meet the diversity that we have in Pinellas County and the observances of our providers, the board, the ELC board last year approved the new holiday schedule policy. It used to be that the coalition picked out 10 of your holidays and then you got to pick 2. Well, now you get to pick all 12. Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah, or, whichever way you want to go with that. So you get to pick all 12 of your paid holidays. You need to make sure, first of all, that you're looking at the correct year's calendar. I know that sounds silly, but we had a lot of people who were upset because they looked at the wrong year's calendar and they put a holiday down for a Saturday or a Sunday date instead of on the holiday date that it was supposed to be. So please make sure you're looking at the 22-23 calendar when you're picking your holiday dates. Make sure when you do your closure dates on your closure calendar that all 12 dates that you've requested for paid holidays are also on there. And then if you are a program that's licensed for school year only, you may have a license that goes year round, but it's only valid during the school year. Make sure that your June, July, and August calendars reflect your closure dates, that you are not able to provide care for school readiness children, because school readiness children can only attend licensed programs. And if the licensing agency, the license board says that you're not licensed for summer, then you can't have school readiness children during the summer. Now, we won't terminate your contract. We're just going to ask you to make sure your closure calendar represents that you are closed to school readiness children on those dates. If you do not choose 12 dates, and we had a lot of people who did this last year, they didn't pick all 12 of their dates. And you don't have to if you don't know what they are right now. But if you're going to add dates later, that requires an amendment to the contract. You also cannot add a date after it has passed. That is a reimbursement rule. We can't have you if I've seen several contracts come through already for 22-23 where people have not put the 4th of July's holiday date that it's being observed on their holidays. We won't have time to amend your contract after July 1st for a July 4th holiday. So it's really important to make sure that you get those right. Now, after your contract is certified, if you want to go back in, hopefully we'll get them certified in time for you to do that. You can go in and make adjustments. But remember, it requires an amendment. Amendments generally take 3 to 5 business days to turn around, because we have to create the amendment. We have to send it to you. You have to fill it out. You have to sign it and submit it. We have to review it to make sure that nothing else has been added. And then it gets a double review before it goes to Lindsay for her signature. And Lindsay's a busy lady. So she does sometimes can't get to those every single day. So just saying 3 to 5 business days. Please keep that in mind when you're making changes in your profile that are going to affect your contract. Remember that paid holidays can't be changed or added once they've passed. All paid holiday changes require an amendment. I talked about that. There are 400 of you, and there are 3 contract specialists. I don't know if everybody knows that or not, but just a little piece of information. Those ladies have 130 of you on each of their caseloads, approximately. That's a lot of people to keep track of. So please be patient with them when they can't return your call in 15 minutes. Or in some cases, 5 minutes. I have a program on my computer where I can see the calls coming in for all of my staff and who they're on the phone with and how often they get called and how many voicemail messages they have. And I can see all that. And sometimes I see people calling in, one call right after it's like a robocall thing. People will call in and 5 minutes later, they'll call again. And 5 minutes later, they'll call, and they don't leave a message. They just keep calling. Please, I'm going to ask if you call in, leave a message, and then give them a little bit of time to call you back. Because like I said, there's 130 of you for every one of them, and they would appreciate that. Thank you. Since I'm their supervisor, I kind of feel responsible for them. So I kind of have to say that because I don't want them burning out. They're all very lovely ladies. All right. Also on our website, on the provider resources section is the reimbursement tip sheet. And Rhonda, who is now off right now for a little while for a surgery, has asked me to say, please, 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 please utilize the reimbursement tip sheet. It has a lot of information in it that will help you to get your reimbursement detail reports, how to handle absences, holidays, rates, your attendance, your sign in and sign out sheets. All of the instructions are there. The other tool that is really very, very helpful on our website is the provider portal user guide. Now, you don't have to get that from our website. It's available to you on the dashboard of your portal. I don't know if you've noticed, but down in the bottom right-hand corner of your dashboard is a little box that says frequently used links. And the provider portal user guide is right there. It's a PDF document. If you open it up, it has step-by-step procedures on how to do everything in the portal system. It even has pictures for those of us who are visual. I am a visual person. If I click on something, I want to look at the picture to make sure it's what I'm seeing on my screen. That's what the provider portal guide does. If you are a person who has to have that in paper, you can print it. I will tell you that it's like over 100 pages long. So double side those prints if you want to save some paper. And it also changes. As they add new things to the portal, they put new instructions in there. So there is the possibility that you may print it out and 3 months later, you may have to print it out again. So just keep that in mind. But if you're a provider and you have the opportunity to have 2 different screens, you can open the provider portal user guide on one screen and do your work in your portal on the other screen. And it's very, very helpful because it takes you step by step right through all the processes. It talks about contracting. It talks about changing information in the profile, doing attendance, uploading documents into the document library. So if you get a chance, take a look at that and see if you can do it. All right. We're almost there, guys. We only got about 6 slides to go, and a couple of those are just question slides. So contract process tips. Here are some common issues that cause contracts to be rejected. The child assessment question. Remember earlier I was talking about child assessment, not ASQs, because we call ASQs assessments also. And so it's really confusing. But when you get to the child assessment question and it's asking you about provider responsibilities and scope of work, when you're in that section and you see this picture, right, right here, this one, it says, if applicable, the eligible provider agrees to conduct child assessments using a reliable assessor. That's your cue to know that you have to have a certificate from the assessment tool that you're using. And again, it's TS Gold, Galileo, or Core. And if you're a center, you have to maintain at least 75% of your staff as reliable assessors in order to continue to participate. If you are doing that, or you're a home provider and you have the certificate and you're doing it, those assessments happen 3 times a year, I think. I'm pretty sure it's 3 times a year. And you get a 5% differential per school readiness child in your program, on top of all your other quality performance incentives. Okay. If you're interested in doing that, Robin Cook in our office is the person that you need to talk to. I think they may be set for this next contract year, but she may be looking to recruit for the following year. And that would give you time to get your staff trained up and get familiar with everything if you're interested in doing that. But if you don't have a certificate saying you're a reliable assessor for Teaching Strategies Gold, Core, or Galileo, you need to say no to that question. Okay? Because this is not about ASQs. ASQs is earlier. All right, that's one thing that we have to reject contracts for, because people say, yes, they're doing assessments thinking we're talking about ASQs when we're talking about the reliable assessor ones. And I can't believe I just used air quotes, but I did. Okay. So the contract process tips, here's another one. Signature and certification. Read your prompts carefully. This is confusing, and it's a common error with completion of contracts every year. And I understand why it happens, because the system talks about your signature. You're about to electronically sign this form. Click yes to confirm your electronic signature, but you'll notice that that says title of signator. Notice I highlighted the title in yellow. So what ends up happening is you're about to electronically sign. Click yes to confirm your signature. You're supposed to put your title in there. So if you're the director of a center, you put director. If you're an owner, you put owner. If you're a family home provider, you can put owner, you can put family provider, whatever you identify with. I don't care what's in there as long as it's not your name. So, because then we have to reject the contract and we have to have you fix it. So anyway, that's what has to happen. All right. And I just think it's worded badly. I've sent up suggestions. We have the opportunity to send suggestions to IT up at the state. That's one of the suggestions that we made, that they find a different way to word that. I don't know whether they're going to or not, but we've begged and pleaded. So, okay. So this next section I'm going to talk about could have some impacts in terms of unpaid days, or loss of funding, or withholding of a final reimbursement if you're leaving school readiness. So essentially, and I say this to my staff all the time, if you think you should call me, call me. If you feel like you need to call licensing to let them know something, you should probably also call the coalition, your contract specialist, and let them know the same thing. Because it's very possible that we have some sort of notification that you're supposed to give us in that particular situation. And if not, at least then we have a heads up in case a parent calls in and complains. Then we've got your side of the story first. So that's always very helpful. Please remember that the rate changes require 14-day notification in writing. I already talked about that. I beat that to death. Notifications not provided until after the change will result in the provider reimbursement to families for the undeclared charges to be credited to their accounts. Temporary closures. A lot of people wait until right before they submit their attendance at the end of the month to put their temporary closure in the portal. Temporary closures are actually supposed to be reported by the close of the business day on the first day the closure occurs. And documentation must be provided to have your temp closures approved. And we should be informed when the program reopens. Now, temp closures are entered through the portal on your attendance tab. Reimbursement validates the closure and communicates with the contracts team for verification. So it's important for us to know. When you have a temp closures are reimbursed for the day if you can't have children there for things that are beyond your control. Things like you walk in the morning and there's an inch of water in the center because the toilet overflowed overnight. Or you have no air conditioning because of a lightning strike. Or you have a massive COVID outbreak among your children and you have to close a room or you have to close the entire center or home. So those are things that, but you need to have documentation. Reimbursement will ask you for documentation that supports that closure. Permanent closures or changes in ownership. If you are getting ready to sell your business or you are retiring, if you're a home provider and you're retiring, or you've just decided, you know, enough is enough, then you need to make sure that you report to the coalition at least 30 days prior to your last day of care for the children. Now, not 30 business days, just 30 days. The reason for this is it allows us to work with families on transferring. We can assist any providers with the transition of audit paperwork. I don't know if you know this or not, it's in your contract, but if you term your contract, you are obligated to transfer back to the coalition 5 years, the last 5 years worth of school readiness documentation in the form of sign in and sign out sheets, extended absence forms, and enrollment documentation, as well as copay receipts. All of the receipts for the provider or for the families. So we have a system in place for that. We have people who can provide technical assistance, but to give you time to gather all that together, it's important that you notify us at least 30 days in advance. Same thing with the sale. Now, I know that the brokers who broker these sales say, shh, don't tell anybody because everybody's going to be upset. They do everyone a disservice when they do that, because the new owner coming in doesn't have time to give us all the documentation to have a contract ready to go the day after the sale so that they can have a contract. So they end up not getting paid until the contract is in place. It does the families a disservice because that provider may then also charge those families a private pay rate. It does the seller no good because if we don't receive 30 days notification, the coalition has the option to withhold your final payment. The only person who benefits from that situation is the broker because he gets his money. So if you are planning on selling, please make sure that you understand as the seller, it's your responsibility to notify us at least 30 days in advance. The other thing I'm going to talk about, unusual incident reports by close of business the next day. Those should be reported, and there's a written report due by the 3rd business day after the incident. That form can be found on our website on the For Providers tab in the forms section. If you subscribe to the coalition's newsletter, it's sent out electronically every month. There are all kinds of tips in there from all the departments about things that are helpful. I would really encourage everyone to do that. And then annual provider profile update. The annual provider profile update starts every year in January and is supposed to end March 1st. I can tell you that up until 2 weeks ago, I was still trying to get providers to update their profile. The period from March to June is for profile review and school readiness contracting. It's really difficult to get the contracts out in a timely manner and give us the time we need for the back and forth and communication with all of you trying to complete your contracts when we're still trying to get profile information updated. We really should not have to race to the wire at the end of every year trying to get contracts done. So if you can update your profile as you get things, so we know that your certificate of liability insurance is going to expire sometime during the year. So yes, you turn in a copy to Shireen, but it would be really great if you uploaded one in the profile. That way, then you don't have to do it when APU comes around, annual provider update. Same thing with your childcare license. When you get your new childcare license, upload that into your profile. A lot of you are putting things in the document library, but they don't transfer over to the profile. So it requires you to have to go into your profile, to your documents tab, and upload those documents. Please be aware that in order to ensure a school readiness contract is valid for reimbursement on July 1st, your signed contract needs to be back to us by the Friday before, which is June the 24th. Now, some of you probably haven't gotten your contract yet. Some of you have gotten your contract and you've submitted it and you haven't heard anything yet that we've reviewed it. I'm reviewing them as fast as I can. Remember, there are 400 of you, 3 contract specialists, and there's only 1 of me for second review. So before I send it, and there's only 1 Lindsay to sign them. So it takes a little bit of time, which is why we're asking that everybody have them in by the 24th to make sure we have plenty of time so that you get paid come July 1st. Any changes you want to make to the current year's profile really should occur before March 1st. Everyone asking to make changes to the profile and amend their 21-22 contract during this March to June period really cuts into our time to get the 22-23 contracts around. So for next year, if everybody could kind of plan, okay, I'm thinking about, raising my rates. If you could get those requests in before March 1st, that would really be helpful. I'm just going to ask. I can't demand that because you have the right to change whatever you want to change whenever you want to change it. But it would really help us out if we could make sure that we're not having a lot of changes to everything between March and June. Just saying. Okay. Any questions? Y'all have been great. I can't see everybody's face, so I can't tell if anybody's asleep, but here is the contact information for the contract specialists. Melody, Melissa, and Kayla handle school readiness. Kayla is South County. Melissa is Mid County. She's fairly new, be nice. And Melody is North County. And she can handle herself, so don't worry about Melody. Ashley is North County for VPK contracting, and Amanda is VPK contracting for South County. Amanda has been here forever. You all know Amanda. Ashley has been here a couple years now. She came on right before the pandemic, so it was an interesting orientation time because we all couldn't see each other. So orienting to a new job when you don't have anybody right there with you is really difficult, but she did a really good job. She's a previous director. She's really organized. She knows her stuff. So there's their contact information. Again, remember, this is going to be on our website. So if you miss any of this information, you can pick it up when we post it. All right, I want to thank you all for attending. I hope that this information was helpful. If you have any other questions you'd like to ask about the contract or the contract process, or anything about the annual provider profile, updates, amendments, please feel free to reach out. We'll do our best to answer your questions. Your contract specialist is your best first contact. If you can't get them, I am absolutely totally available to assist if you need me to. So I appreciate it. Thank you all very much. And I hope you have a great rest of the week. All right. Everyone take care. Thank you very much.